Testing, testing. Hi.
Oh, you can see us. Hello.
Yeah, I flipped it this time, so now we know if the battery dies, it'll go black on the screen instead of us just continuing to talk. Okay, I think I'll talk about handles. I don't show handle pulling on TikTok or Instagram or YouTube Shorts because it's just deeply inappropriate looking. For some reason, I'm probably wrong, but for some reason, I feel like you, my YouTube audience, you're gonna take this super seriously. There could be 100,000 comments, not a single one will be dirty-minded, because I know that my viewers, their minds, they're not in the gutter, they're in the somewhere else that's clean. So I've just got some porcelain here. This is just commercial porcelain straight out of the bag. I'm gonna wedge it up. And then I want to make a carrot shape, or like a long cigar shape. This is brand new commercial clay, so it shouldn't have any air bubbles or anything. So I don't have to wedge it too much. I'm just going to start squeezing and turning. I take my palm open and facing the ceiling on my right hand, and then I just rotate it with my left, sort of squeezing evenly as I go. What you really don't want to do is like squeeze this really tight and get like a bunch of fingerprints in it. You want it to be kind of as straight as possible, like even, without any massive dips or chunks. Okay, now that I've got this sort of carrot shape, I don't need all of this chunk. Some people just leave it and then keep pulling from the same chunk. I'm a little picky, so I like to twist off that excess, and I'll use that for the next one, and just keep this as is, especially since these are giant mugs and these are gonna be giant handles. So I take my carrot and I slap it against the board until I get a carrot that's been run over by a stick, I got a carrot that's been, okay, so you tap it on the other side until it's like a carrot that got flattened and run over by a car. It's sort of like a strip or like a belt or something. Then you're gonna take your bucket of water and hold it in your left hand if you're right-handed, and just hold it by the top. Keep this entire section dry, otherwise it's gonna slip out of your hands. Probably the hardest part of my job as a pottery teacher is standing in a room full of middle schoolers and doing this in front of them. And so what I like to do is sort of prime them to think in more wholesome directions. So I say, has anybody ever milked a cow? No? You know what, neither have I, but if I were to milk a cow, I have a feeling it would go something like this. You take your prepped carrot, dip it into your bucket, get your hands super slippery, and then you're gonna make this oval shape with your hands, okay? So it's sort of parallel from this section of the finger to that section of that finger. We're gonna wrap our hand around it and pull straight down. Add a little more water, pull straight down, flip it, pull straight down. If you've milked a cow before, and this is nothing like milking a cow, I don't want to hear it. Another sort of animal-related analogy I use here is, you know, when a cat walks by you and you pet it, you start at the head and then like through the body and then like the tail, you kind of pull the tail as it walks by, like to pet it. You don't like yank it, but you lightly, you know, pet the tail. That's kind of how much pressure I'm using here. So the reason we're doing this is because this is going to very evenly thin and stretch this handle. I like it to taper towards these sides here. If the edges where your hand's going to be touching it are too thick and unwieldy, that can make for a clunkier mug holding experience. I'm also taking my thumb knuckle here and using that to thin out any of the portions that are too thick. You definitely don't want to rush this if you are, you know, newer to this pulling technique. I would say definitely take your time. We don't want it to be too thin because then you won't feel like you have a nice sturdy hold. So I like to leave it kind of thick toward the center and then tapered toward either end. So once you got a nice sort of wiggle going here, that's probably a good sign that this is ready. So I just lay it flat on the table. I take a needle tool. I'm gonna cut the top and I'm gonna cut the bottom. And you always wanna cut it longer than you think you're gonna need it, because of course you can always cut more, but if you cut it too short, you're starting over. I take the tip of the needle tool here to kind of pry up one of the ends, and then I'm just going to arch it how I want it to end up on my mug, or at least somewhat close. Bye. This is going to be sort of an attachment from the base, if that makes sense. Like, it's going to be widest at the base. This is staying, oh, it fell. I was gonna say this was gonna, if it stays on its own, you can just leave it like that to kind of set up. But if it's not gonna stay on its own, you can kind of just take some of your extra clay and just prop it up. That way it sort of starts to dry in the shape that you ultimately want. So now we're just gonna do that a bunch more times. Voiceover Sarah here, let's look at the whole handle pulling process with no cuts. First, I take the wedged clay and form it into a carrot. It should be thicker at the top and narrower at the bottom. I don't recommend rolling it out like a coil. I think that the squeezing and turning works well as long as you're mindful of distributing the pressure evenly. You just don't want any major indents anywhere. I rip off the extra chunk at the top, but you can just leave it there and then continue to pull from it handle after handle if you want to. Second, I tap it on the table on opposite sides so it looks like a carrot that got ran over by a car. Don't let it get too thin or too wide, and don't tap it into a rectangle. Third, we are getting the handle super duper wet and we are pulling. I only pull in one direction, and that is from the top to the bottom. I let go at the bottom and start again at the top. I am not pulling down and up. Clay takes the shape of your hands. It molds to pressure, so keep your eye on the handle and just notice things. If it looks too thick somewhere, try stretching that clay downwards. If it's too wide, try squeezing the sides more. Just like throwing on the wheel, handle pulling is a skill that has to be tried and failed many times before it starts to feel remotely comfortable. Once I'm happy with the handle, I lay it flat on the table, cut it to size, being mindful of the angle I'm cutting it at, and prop it up to dry. Like I said earlier, this is just one of many, many, many ways to make a handle. I actually was originally taught to pull it directly from the mug. So basically, instead of holding your flattened carrot at the top and pulling that, you attach the top of the flattened carrot to the mug, then hold the mug on its side and hover it above the bucket and pull from there. A lot of potters will tell you that this is actually the only way to get a handle that feels like it's part of the mug rather than being tacked on, and in a lot of cases I think that is 100% true. However, I ruined a lot of mug bodies doing it that way because for a long time I was throwing my work incredibly thin as like a technical flex, which meant that they weren't strong enough when leather hard to hold up the weight and strain of pulling a handle. The bodies would just bend or rip. And now that I've lightened up a bit on making my thing so thin, I actually just prefer the look of the handle being a separate shape that was glued onto the body. For a lot of my shapes, I think that works. So I finished trimming those mugs. There were 6 and now there are 4. People ask me all the time if I trim through my stuff, and the answer is yes, constantly. So there are a few things I have pre-prepared for attaching handles. One of them is this porcelain slip. I just keep it in this little gelato cup. And I also have this scoring tool. These are great. I don't know if the camera will focus on it, but it's just got a bunch of little needle tools all together in one little sheath. So you can just score a little more fast, a little more efficient. You just want to hold them up against your pot in a bunch of different ways to see if it's the vibe. I think this is a little smaller than I want. I'm going to put this one back, and I'm going to take one of my slightly larger ones. Hi, Sarah from the future here. I'm terrible at this, and the last time that I was recording this handle demo, my camera ran out of battery and I did not notice. So I'm back literally months later to finish this handle demo. So I pulled the handles just the same as you saw a little earlier, and they've had some time to set up. But you can see that the handle shape that I'm working with is a little bit different. I concentrated on leaving the top and bottom very, very thick. So you just get some nice contrast between the attachment point and sort of where your finger will loop in. Let's see. That's looking quite cute. I think this will be good without too much adjustment. So again, without totally unbending the handle, and taking that needle tool, cutting, and giving it a little bit of a U shape, because the mug itself is round. Same thing here, beveling it so that it's going to contour to the shape of the mug and kind of rounding it out a little bit. Whoa, okay, so I actually didn't cut that correctly, but now look at how different of a handle that is just by changing the angle of attachment. So I think what I did was I cut too much from the top and bottom. They were closer to being correct than I thought they were. So in order to undo the drama of how beveled this is, I'm gonna cut it a little more blunt at a little bit less of an angle. So I'm cutting off that bottom part of like that ramp. I'm gonna make sure that we're vertical, like symmetrical up and down. One common mistake is that you don't check it at this angle and then it's attached like that, kind of at a diagonal, so make sure that it's in a line. I actually think that that's kind of sick, so I'm just going to attach that as is. Using a needle tool to lightly trace where I'm going to need to score. I'm gonna take my Wolverine claws. The texture of this mug is already slightly scored, which is kind of fun. And this is not the only way to make handles. If you guys are interested in seeing handles pulled directly from the body, I can show you guys how I would do that, even if it's not what I tend to do these days. Again, I'm pushing so that a little bit of goo is gonna goo out from between the handle and the mug. Top of the handle, lower than the top of the mug itself. And we're gonna press. Especially if your pots are kind of soft, you wanna make sure you have a supporting hand on the inside so that you don't just dent your wall when you're pushing. But this mug in particular is quite leather hard, so I'm not super concerned about bending the wall by pushing too hard. Run my finger over the attachment points all around. So here's another mug, a very similar looking mug, similar in shape and size. This one's a little bit bigger, but let's see if we can get a very different handle on this next one so you can kind of look at your options. So instead of doing that kind of funky shape, let's go for something a little bit more traditional. This is why a lot of what goes into pottery is just design. You spend a lot of time tinkering and toying with like what looks best on a form. And then once you sort of have that figured out, then you're free to kind of make a bunch. But that's why even if it looks like it doesn't take somebody a long time to make a single mug, you don't know how many, prototype mugs they might have been through to get to the design that they're making for you. Okay, and we're scoring. We're scoring. Dabbing water, lining it up, and we're pressing. Line it up, press it in. Okay, and then make sure that you like the silhouette. Run your finger over the attachment points. And that's not bad either. That would be a nice 4-finger hold for somebody. Like for me, with my hands, that's definitely a 4-finger hold. For somebody else, it might be a 3-finger hold. Let's compare. So the impression I'm getting from these, this one just is a little more peewee and a little more stylized, and I like that with that handle. Whereas this, it's a little bit more plain. Not bad, but a little more plain. So somebody might really like this handle a lot because it's more spacious. Someone might like this one a lot because it's a little more like precious, I guess. But it's sort of just a preference thing. So let me know in the comments what you like better. And it's voiceover Sarah again. I really hope you enjoyed the video or found it useful. This is the first long form video that I've done completely on my own, doing my own filming and editing and everything. I invested a frightening amount of the money I made selling pottery into a digital camera, a microphone, Adobe Premiere, and of course a Skillshare subscription to learn how to do things, and I am still at a very basic level. My desire to post this has fluctuated, like the lighting and the exposure are weird in what I recorded, and obviously I messed up my recording halfway through and had to do reshoots, but it was time to practice what I preach and just put myself out there, even if I know that my skills have a lot of room for improvement. So let me know what you guys thought of the video, if there are any other tutorials you're dying to see, and what kind of long form content you'd be interested in seeing from me. Like and subscribe, leave a comment saying hi, ring the bell or whatever, and hopefully my next long form video will be better and will be out sooner rather than later.